I wanted to share with you that my very first doctoral class was educational leadership. And we spent a considerable amount of time discussing the history of educational policy in the United States. And when we studied the policies of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, I learned that policy related to Native Americans focused on assimilation through boarding schools, aiming to eradicate, completely wipe out Native cultures and languages, and to force Native children into mainstream American society. Now, the boarding school system had a devastating impact on Native American communities, as you can imagine, and it led to the loss of the languages, the culture, and their traditional ways of life. Many of these Native children experienced both physical and emotional abuse, and some actually died while enrolled at the boarding schools. And the legacy of these policies continues to affect Native American communities today with ongoing efforts now to try and address the trauma, the generational trauma, and also to promote healing. And as I studied more about how these policies did aim to erase this Native heritage, I found myself wanting to know more about Native history and Native culture and Native tradition. And my research actually started with Mike Dickey in his 2004 book on Arrow Rock history. As administrator for the Arrow Rock State Historic Site for many years, his scholarly work and his collaboration with the Osage Nation is truly a local treasure trove for anyone who's interested in finding out more, because it really provides for us a foundation for understanding not just Native heritage overall, but especially the Osage heritage in and around our village of Arrow Rock. In 2019, I had the privilege of attending the University of Missouri's grand opening of the Land of the Osages Research Center just outside of Gravois Mills, which is about 65 miles south of here. And that center focuses on research in agroforestry and a sustainably focused system that combines trees and shrubs with some limited livestock to be managed as a single ecosystem in partnership with the Osage Nation. And before the opening ceremony that day, Mike Dickey introduced me to Chief Standing Bear and other representatives of the Osage Nation. And as these Osage leaders paid tribute to their heritage and their history and their culture during that opening ceremony, I was just caught up in the incredible beauty and the insight that the Osages bring to the world. And I was inspired that day to tell Monshan Akita Tonka's story. We in Arrow Rock know him as Big Soldier, and he was an important leader in early Osage partnerships with the United States. And he was born near Arrow Rock around 1773. In 1813, he worked with George Sibley to establish a factory trade system here in Arrow Rock. Now, in the context of trading with Native Americans, factories were government-controlled trading posts that were established to regulate and to facilitate trade, particularly the fur trade, with the goal of fostering alliances and controlling the commerce here on the frontier. This factory system, initiated by the US government in 1795, aimed to establish a network of trading posts with government-appointed factors who would oversee the trade of goods with Native American tribes. George Sibley was the factor at Fort Osage, about an hour or so from here, and then also here in Arrow Rock. And a factor was the government-appointed trader who was responsible for overseeing the trading post, and that included the bookkeeping, processing the furs, supervising the trade room, and attending to, quote, Indian affairs as deemed important by the United States. And these factories, which were located at military posts, offered manufactured goods to Native Americans at wholesale prices, while also then buying their furs and other goods at market prices. The United States government hoped to gain influence over Native American tribes by controlling trade and thereby promoting economic dependence and also political alliance. Jimmy Beason tells Manshanikita Tonka's story in our 8th episode titled Great Protector. Now, those of you who follow the series know that Glenn North, who's written several of the episodes for the series, he was the one that introduced me to Jimmy last year. Jimmy's a citizen of the Osage Nation from the Eagle Clan, and he writes nonfiction and fiction, poetry, and essays about contemporary Native issues. Additionally, he is a professor of Indigenous and American Indian Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University over in Lawrence, Kansas. And Jimmy's recent book, Native Americans in History, is a really insightful anthology of the vital role that Native people play in history. If any of you are interested in purchasing his book, just contact the Friends of Arrow Rock office and we'll get you connected with how to purchase this book. And in Great Protector, Jimmy has taken the actual literal words of George Sibley and Thomas Jefferson, along with the words of Manshanikita Tonka, as recorded by Sibley, to craft this very poignant play. I have to say, as producer, it's been so enlightening and so fulfilling to me in working with Jimmy as he put together, crafted this episode. So I'd like to formally introduce Jimmy now, bring him out on stage so that he might share a few thoughts with you. Jimmy?
Stand over here. Hawaii dahe. Okashe ke tashe. Dadiska hada kashe. Ia do ekipshe kombra zan ni wawe hoi kombra. Pahuska jaje abria. Hello, how are you? So I wanted to come out here and give a little bit about information about myself and about us as Osage people. My name is Jimmy Beason. I'm originally from Oklahoma. And when I was about 20 years old, I started attending classes at Haskell Indian Nations University. And after that, we ended up having a daughter. And so I graduated from school into fatherhood, like literally the same semester. And after that, we kind of roamed around a little bit, and then I ended up going back to, we as a family ended up going back to Lawrence, Kansas, and I ended up going back to Haskell, this time as an employee. And currently I teach in the Indigenous Studies department at Haskell. And one thing that I've realized in this teaching that I've been doing for the past 10 years or so is that nobody hardly knows anything about natives. Unfortunately, the curriculum in the country has pretty much only goes up to a certain point, right? And the only thing people know about Native Americans is riding on the plains wearing headdresses, right? And unfortunately, that's, although that is valid, some Native people do that, but there's over 600 different tribal nations that have different languages, different views on the world, different spirituality, different protocols, different ways of interacting. But one thing that unites them all is the fact that being of this land and of this territory, we have a certain relationship to the land. And pretty much all cultures, all indigenous cultures, we view the land as kinship, as relatives, right? It's a living thing that you want to respect and you want to be able to live in some kind of peaceful coexistence with, right? And I think that's one of the things that was very different when our people encountered the first European traders that came into these territories, because we slowly began to see how the land began to be looked at as something like a commodity, something to be sold, bought, parceled out, and distributed, right? So that was very antithetical to who we are as Native people. And because of that process, because of the colonization, the boarding schools, and the loss of language and loss of spirituality, we in these current generations as Native people, as Osages, Cherokees, Seminole Creek, whoever is out there, we had to try to weather the storm, so to speak. We ended up losing a lot of those things, but through sheer perseverance and determination and the fortitude of our ancestors and the medicine people, we still have a lot of our ceremonies today. We still have a semblance of our spirituality, right? And I think that's the important thing, is because this multifaceted attack on Native people resulting in the current generations of us being somewhat disconnected. And the thing is, we as Native people, we're trying to heal that and trying to get reconnected with that, because that is, our culture is a compass for life, right? Going through life can be hard. And those cultural teachings and that worldview and that outlook provided us with the guidance that we needed in order to make it through life successfully in the best manner, with honor, dignity, and respect, and everything that we could do to be the best human beings possible, right? So in many ways, when we do these things, when we come out and do performances or we discuss our history, it's also a healing path for us as Native people, because like I was saying, historically, even presently, Native people have been marginalized, kind of pushed to the side, viewed as just kind of like mascots or stereotypes. There was even at one point in time in this country when the Indian was the vanishing Indian. I met people in my life going on the West Coast who thought Native people no longer existed, who thought Native people were totally dead, who were just wiped out and gone. And they get surprised to see that there's still Native people living here today wearing Skechers, wearing Levi's, listening to rap music or whatever, So I think that's kind of one of the things, is that, we're just like everybody else trying to live through this life the best way we can, while also trying to maintain our culture as best we can and trying to reconnect with that spirit, right? And one way you would do that, again, is kind of showcasing this, talking about these things. In the script, you'll see some instances of humor, and I think that's important to understand, that through all the history that we've been through as Native people, one aspect that has always kept us going is our sense of humor, which is totally ironic, because most Native people have been depicted as these stoic, not smiling, staring into the distance, staring at the eagles soaring above, and then, and then just constantly in a state of meditation, right? But one thing that people don't realize is that our humor is a big part of our culture, not only just naturally, but as a way to kind of process and deal with a lot of the things that had happened in our communities, because we still remember them quite well, So I think that is one of the things that we need to understand, is that when we talk about humor, because these things are serious topics, but also tying in that humor part and being able to talk about it and work our way through it, at least for me and my relatives, it is a way to kind of process that and kind of make a point with that humor, also on top of the serious subject matter. But I want to say thank you to everyone coming out, and I want to say thank you to Mike for hitting me up and inviting me to be a part of this process. It was very educational for me, and it was fun. And last night at the rehearsal, just seeing the words being brought to life by the actors felt really good. and it makes me want to do it more because I was like, oh wow, that's cool. Just seeing that come to life in the way they articulate and inflect the meaning behind those words. So I appreciate everyone being here and seeing this and being a part of it with us. So I just want to say that much and say thank you, Wewana, Gagana Brista Mikshe.
Oi, dahe, okaje gide daje. Tada, shka tankishi, ido ekip ishkombra, jani wawiwi hopi kombra, mon shon kida tonka, jaje abri, wa jaje nikashi. Osage people come from the stars. We descended to Earth from the upper worlds so that we could become human beings. On our way toward Earth, Honga Chudon, the immature golden eagle, it's a very specific figure, led us further towards the crescents of 7 red oak trees. When the people looked down, they saw the entire earth was covered with water. So another spirit, Opondonga, the great elk, he threw himself down upon the water 4 times, which revealed the land underneath. Opongonda continued to help by creating all the grasses, all the hills, all the mountains, all the prairies, all the streams and the rivers from different parts of his body. We still revere and remember Opononga, and endearingly call him Monjonghake, the earth maker. From that point on, our people walked the earth in 3 groups. The first group coming across the water, known as a spirit named Wajaje. So our ancestors called themselves Wajaje, or water people, or giver of names. Wajaje then named the second group Honga, the people of the land, and the third group Teju, the people of the sky. They say 3 bands journeyed across the lands of Opongoda, crafted until they happened across the village of Utadononsi, the isolated earth people. The village was chaotic, and signs of violence among the people were littered across the land, along with the decay of animal carcasses and human bones. The men and women had tattooed faces and bodies. The rot of carcasses was in the air. Regardless, the leader of the Wajaje cautiously walked towards the village and met with the leader of the Todongzi. We smoked a powerful pipe. Much was discussed amongst us, and after some deliberation, the Utodononzi agreed to join the Wajaje, and all 4 groups moved to a new land away from the village of decay. The 4 groups merge to become the Nionkonska, the people of the middle waters. Together, the 4 divisions represent the sky, the earth, the land, and the water. I am old. I am going to leave this world soon. I remember. I remember well. The men who tried to change me. The men who hated us. The men who ruled. Yes, I remember them too well.
My name is George Sibley, and I am the new factor at the fort here to trade superior European and American items to you, Osagis.
I think you mean Osages. Our true name is Nionkonshka, which means people of the middle of waters. And going back to the name Osage, even if that isn't correct, as it's an anglicized corruption of the word Wajaje,
technically a French corruption of the word because those silly fur trappers pronounce a W sound with the letter O.
Yes, my mistake. By the way, you speak remarkably good English for a native person.
Well, I've visited Washington twice before. Have you ever met with President Jefferson? Because I have.
My children, your forefathers have doubtless handed it down to you that in ancient times the French were the fathers of all the red men in the country called Louisiana.
Okay, I got lost in France once. Let me explain. We were met by a man named Delaney, a confidence man, masquerading as a military officer who wanted to acquire 6 Osages to accompany him on an official delegation. In truth, he was acquiring native entertainers for a traveling show across Europe. We took him for his word, and we journeyed east with him, visiting Belgium, Holland, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany. 6 Osages went from here to Belgium, Holland, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany. And then we ended up in France. We rode in a hot air balloon. We saw a theater. We met a king. I got married 3 times. Consummated. And everywhere we went, we satiated the curiosity of European spectators who wanted to glimpse us noble savages in our animal skins. And then Delaney fled with all of the money, leaving us to wander around Europe in poverty. We were beggars, rooting in the backwoods of ye old kingdom. Fortunately, we found refuge with some of France's finest, the Marquis de Lafayette and Bishop William de Bourgh. They showed us kindness and made sure that we got back to our Turtle Island. I'm still fond of cheese and wine.
That is a remarkable story. I don't think I got your name.
My name is Monshilakila Tonka, and I am an Osage man. Monshilakila Tonka roughly translates to great protector of the land. The French call me the Soldat du Chêne, which means the soldier of oak. Americans call me Big Soldier.
My children, in the days of your fathers, France ceded Louisiana to the Spaniards, and they became your fathers. We are now become your fathers and brothers. Be assured you will have no cause to regret the change. Nevermore will you have occasion to change your fathers. We are all now of one family.
One family? Really? Anyway, George, for what purpose are we meeting?
It is my pleasure to present you with this medal for your distinguished leadership amongst your people. And I have this musket, which is top of the line for all of your hunting and war purposes. It's
cute. I recall my time parlaying amongst the Americans in the early 1800s after they intruded upon our territories in what you call Missouri. With gifts and flattery, they wanted to keep us tame and reliant and loyal to the United States, as they were quite fearful that we might side with the British in their quarrels or assist the Gestapo, the Spanish, who are constantly on the peripheral of our territory. But before Americans, the first whites that we encountered were French fur traders. We called the white man Ishtahe, meaning yellow eyes, quite possibly stemmed from ingesting too much firewater. My responsibility was to maintain friendly trade relations with all yellow eyes, whether they were French, British, Spanish, or American, so that we could access silk, tools, tobacco, blankets, cloth, ornaments, and, of course, weapons. And I recall Tecumseh, the famous Shawnee leader who attempted to recruit Osages to establish a native confederacy and repelled the Europeans. Osages participated in the Battle of Wabash against General Arthur St. Clair, where 1,000 U.S. soldiers were killed at war. It was easy. Tecumseh's speech was passionate, precise, beautiful. We declined. We, at that time, viewed other tribes as more of a threat than the white man. The white men who wandered into our territories,
They were killed or robbed without retaliation. We didn't see that that trickle was becoming a flood. We should have said yes to Tecumseh's invitation and guarded our territories from the Yellow Eyes. Later, the Yellow Eyes gave out medals to leaders such as myself, these medals engraved with the faces of white leaders. They created division amongst our leadership, as some of us received big medals and some of us received little medals. And some of my relatives, they maintained an unhealthy preoccupation with the size, say, of their medals, that they may have been unconsciously motivated by their own feelings of lustful inadequacies, and to which I say it is not the size of the medal, but how well you polish it. And it is important for me to share with you all that my medals were the biggest ones. One of the medals I received from Lafayette when I was in France.
Well, if you won't take the musket, then I have this assortment of hatchets and arrows that are manufactured with steel, which I implore you to take, as we might also need your help to fight the British and other unscrupulous whites in the area.
So, you're not unscrupulous?
No, sir, I am civilized.
So what makes one white man unscrupulous and another civilized?
We have the Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that we are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have furs and peltries which we want, and we have clothes and other useful things which you want. Let us employ ourselves then in making exchanges of these articles useful to both.
The Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. We broke free from British tyranny to attain freedom. Can anyone else in the world say thus?
Freedom. Everything about you is enslaved and is in chains. You have enslaved the animals. You have enslaved the plants. You have enslaved human beings. Sibley, you yourself have enslaved Africans and even had children with them, so that makes you a double hypocrite. You take all the land, you fence it up, and your animals are fenced in, and you yourselves are barricaded inside of your houses, afraid of everything, including each other.
I'm just here to make a living.
And build a nation. Manifest destiny. May the Great Spirit look down upon us and cover us with the mantle of his love.
Sibley's voice, Jefferson's voice, they linger in the back of my head, quagmires of hypocrisy. The arrival of Yellow Eyes, it brought uncertainty. We were not aware of who to trust. We were tethered to a vast trade network that included Fort Osage and Arrow Rock, both managed by Sibley.
In 1805, my father was appointed as an Indian agent for the U.S. government. I used my father's acquaintance with President Jefferson to get a position as assistant factor at Fort Bellefontaine, at the mouth of the Missouri River near St. Louis, Missouri. And in 1808, I was named factor at Fort Osage. Upon my arrival at Fort Osage, I met with the neighboring Osage tribes, although I found them poor and very troublesome. In 1813, during the war, I opened a temporary trading post in Arrow Rock, but still visited Fort Osage. I kept a journal, recorded inventory, engaged in trade with the Osage, as well as other tribal nations, and did my best to uphold the treaties and dignity and honesty. Fort Osage was my domain, and that's where I met Big Soldier, a distinguished warrior and orator of the Little Osages, a man of good sense.
Okay, a little inside baseball. I was so flattered when Sib referred to me as a warrior and orator. In contrast to President Jefferson, who I met in 1805 on a visit to Washington, D.C., where he continually referred to our delegation of full-grown Osage men as children.
My children, chiefs of the Osage Nation, I welcome you sincerely to the seat of the government of the United States. The journey you have taken is long and fatiguing and proves your desire to become acquainted with your new brothers of this country. I thank you for your visit, and I thank the Master of Life who has preserved you by the way and brought you safely here. My children, nevermore will you have occasion to change your fathers. We are now all of one family, born of the same land and bound to live as brothers and to have nothing more to do with the strangers who live beyond the great waters. You have furs and peltries which we want, and we have clothes and other useful things which you want. Let us employ ourselves then in making exchanges of these articles useful to both. My children, on your return, tell your chief, the Big Track, and all your people that I take them by the hand, that I become their father hereafter, and that they shall know our nation only as friends and benefactors. My children, these are my words. Carry them to your nation. Keep them in your memories and our friendship in your hearts. And may the Great Spirit look down upon us and cover us with the mantle of his love.
While I was in the midst of the Pike expedition, Jefferson gave that speech on December 31st, 1806, to the third delegation of Osage leaders who were visiting Washington. Although you called us your children, at least you didn't expect us to call us daddy, and I really thank you for that, because there's a line, it's over there. However, I do want to point out that throughout your speech in Washington, while it was eloquent and poetic, there's just one problem, Tom.
Oh, and what might that be?
It's a lie. I have here a letter you wrote to Meriwether Lewis blatantly supporting his scheme to drive us from these lands. This land and take our home.
What do you mean, my child?
I quote, I regret that it has been found necessary to come to open rupture with the Osages, but being so, I approve of the course you have pursued. As the principal obstacle to the Indians acting in large bodies against the Osage is the want of provisions. We might supply the want and the ammunition also if they need it. I have expressed myself to General Dearborn in favor of 3 companies of spies and military supplies that you requested. So also in having established factories, they will have more powerful effects they will have more powerful effects than so many armies in subduing the Indians. Did you or did you not write this letter, Tom?
Yes, it is true. I wrote the letter. The truth is, you are the great nation south of the Missouri, as the Sioux are great north of that river. There is no way to possibly fight a war with you and win, as you have the advantage of terrain and numbers. But we could control you with our factories and goods.
What about you, Sibley? Did you know about this plot to get us addicted to your European goods so that you could better control us.
Yes, I did. My role as a factor was to carry out the complicated task of helping you savages to become civilized and encourage you to disrobe your primitive ways and adopt the ways of the enlightened Christian farmers who valued private property. We couldn't just give you money. You wouldn't understand how to spend it properly. You might drink it up or use it to purchase items from the British. We hoped to prevent this, as well as to keep peace between you and the other rogues by rewarding or punishing you with the weapon of commerce.
Why? You two claimed to respect us. Does your word and sense of endearment mean so little? Explain yourselves to the assembled, Tom.
The Indian tribes residing within the limits of the United States have, for a considerable time, been growing more and more uneasy at the constant diminution of the territory they occupy. And the policy has long been gaining strength with them of refusing absolutely all further sale. In order peaceably to counteract this policy of theirs and to provide an extension of territory, two measures seemed expedient. First, to encourage them to abandon hunting, to apply to the raising of stock, to agriculture and domestic manufacture, and thereby prove to themselves that less land and labor will maintain them in this better than in their former mode of living. Second, to multiply trading houses among them, and place within their reach those things which will contribute more to the domestic comfort than the possession of extensive but uncultivated wilds. I trust and believe we are acting for their greatest good. You are merciless Indian savages and enemies of progress. Your superstitions and stories and lives mean nothing when compared to the majesty and rule of the United States. It is our burden to guide you toward enlightenment. Many savages have embraced the calling of civilization, such as the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole. They have discarded their infancy and grown to be civilized men.
Hear, hear, Mr. President. Well said. Big soldier, you are a man of good sense. We must continue urging the subject of civilization upon you.
Civilized. Civilization? I see and I admire your living, your warm, good houses, your extensive fields of corn, your cows, your oxen, your workhorses, your wagons, and 1,000 machines that I know not the use of. I see that you're able to clothe yourselves, even from weeds and grass. In short, you can do almost anything you please. You whites possess the power of subduing almost every animal to your use. You're surrounded by slaves. Everything about you is in chains. I'm going to say it again. Everything about you is in chains. More importantly, You've become slaves to yourselves. I fear that if I should change my pursuits for yours, I should become a slave too. Talk to my sons. But perhaps they might be persuaded to adopt your fashions, if nothing else, to recommend it to their sons. For myself, I was born free. I will die free. I am dying. No matter. I will die free. And they will not. Kakuna, Rishta Mingshe.
Thank you for joining us in this journey, this story of Manchana Kita Tonka. And thanks, Jimmy, for a really poignant way for us to look at the actual words that these three human beings shared amongst each other 200 years ago, more than that. We want to, with each episode, we want to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions of the playwright, and we want to bring the cast back out, the cast members. And let's have a discussion about what we've experienced today. I'm looking out at the house. Do we have any questions? Anything you'd like to address? Yes.
Big soldier, so just not knowing a lot of his history, did he die free? Was he enslaved or died home? Last days of life.
So he died in Oklahoma after the Osages moved from here to their territory, their reservation in Oklahoma. Yes, Jennifer.
Does anybody know if any of Big Soldier's descendants are still around?
You're looking at him.
Both of you?
I'm guessing it's very hard for natives to trace their ancestry.
Don't ask us to do that.
Yeah.
And maybe reconsider the Chiefs hat.
Reconsider the what?
The Chief's hat.
If we're going to go ahead and represent Osages in southern Missouri Hills, to be very clear, that's not appropriate, and we can have a different conversation about it outside of the theater.
Any other comments or questions from the audience?
Thank you, Michael, for telling the truth.
Well, thank you. It's been a journey for me from the moment that I started to study policies that I was unaware of, that I wasn't taught as a child in elementary school or high school, or even through my bachelor's degree, to begin to realize that there were decisions that were made that created really difficult situations for a lot of people. And as I began to do more and more research and actually read the words of the leaders of our nation at the time and the decisions that they were making, it put me in a place to try and understand how I could be more empathetic, more understanding about what had happened, and how moving forward I could work to try and avoid those things happening again. And I think the beauty of art is that it does help us make sense of life. It allows us to escape the reality for a moment and to process in a way that opens our mind up. And that was one of the things as Jimmy and I started to work together a year ago on this story. I knew this story only because there's a lake named Big Soldier Lake in the Arrow Rock State Park, the first historic site in Missouri. And I love Arrow Rock, but I didn't know that story. And then as I started to dive in deep and read some of the work that Mike Dickey has done and understand a little more deeply, and then to be educated by Jimmy about the heritage and the culture and the things that I knew nothing about, I wasn't taught, selfishly, I'm like, wow, I missed so much. I could have had such a deeper understanding of where I grew up had I known more about the Osages. So it's been a wonderful journey for me to examine the truth and not be afraid to explore it and to understand it and to read it more critically and to think through it about how I can make decisions moving forward. So thanks for making that comment. Any other comments or questions from the audience? Yes, oh, over here, and then we've got one over here.
I am not a student of Thomas Jefferson, but I was really struck by his words, and he sounded like he thought he was a king to me in many ways. And I, coming out of that background that he did you find that to be true in any of the other writings of his that you looked at, or was this just in his interactions with the native people?
I too am not a Jefferson scholar. I can tell you that when Jimmy and I started talking about what telling the story could be about, we really thought it was just Nikita Tonka and George Sibley. And as we were researching, that actual speech popped up, and you can find it on the National Park Service website. And the full transcript is there. It's much, much longer than Ed's beautiful performance of it. But each paragraph of his speech begins with "my children." And again, not as a Jefferson scholar, I can't compare what other speeches that he made, but I found that very interesting that this speech was, even though he referred to the Osages and the other tribal leaders as his children, it was a hopeful speech that there was a willingness to partner and work together, which of course very quickly that promise went away.
So I think the thing about at the time, you gotta remember that Thomas Jefferson and others like him were, they seen themselves as blatantly superior to the tribes. And there's this very paternalistic tone to the way they're talking to them, almost like the whole concept of the great white father, and going into the whole thing of like, when he's saying like "my children," they're literally thinking they're like children to like the world of civilization and all this stuff. So I think that comes across as very, it's kind of, they're very arrogant in the way that they're saying these things. And, but ultimately too, when you look at Jefferson's history, when it concerns like Native people, they were thinking like, well, they're children, but we can raise them up to be on our level. But at the same time, they were also just about trying to get at the land. So going back to that, the letter that was written by Jefferson to Meriwether Lewis, and when Lewis and Clark were over in this area, they were basically trying to gather intelligence, and they were kicking all that information back to like the people in Washington. as a better way to basically just kind of take the land, right? Because that was their whole, when you look at the Lewis and Clark trails and all that stuff, it wasn't just about the flora and the fauna, it was about trying to determine the disposition of the tribes that were in that area. Which ones were willing to trade and play ball, and which ones were more likely to resist. But that particular letter, when it comes to the Osages, there were different factions of Osages. Some of them were willing to go along with kind of like the trade networks a little bit more. Others just totally disregarded it, and that's why you had an Arkansas band of Osages who just left because they weren't totally comfortable with the way the northern Osages were interacting with the British and the Americans, the European traders, because they felt like they were giving them too much power over them with the whole trade. Because the whole point of the trade too was to control them. And if they get out of line, it's like, well, we're gonna take away your trade, you know? So it was a way of kind of making them more flexible to US policies. But at the same time, again, not all Osages were on that. Some of them didn't like it, some of them left. So that's another thing too, is that's the reason why we had different Osage bands, was because some of them wanted to get away from that. And a lot of them moved down to Arkansas. So there's like different groups of them. I think when he says Big Track, that was talking about, I think maybe Claremont and his son Mad Bear, who were down in Arkansas. And they were a lot more hostile to like the trade networks and things, and they wanted to still maintain their traditional values and their traditional sense of living in their life. So, but yeah, so that, yeah, just kind of coming from that whole paternalistic approach on Jefferson's end.
So first of all, thank you all for being patient with me. In terms of that paternalistic approach, that's part of what had to happen with that character, Big Soldier. I am not nearly as much of a dick as I came off as. So like, I'm going to walk that back. And I'm also gonna introduce you to Osage factionalism right now, because not to tap dance on a pinhead here, however, I wouldn't even necessarily say, Jimmy, that they were trying to elevate us up. They were trying to make us economic units. They were creating a labor force. They weren't gonna raise anyone up. They were doing the same thing to Irish, to Italians, to any nationality that they could marginalize. That's what happened during the Industrial Revolution. That's what we all have in common. That's what Dad taught me. He said, remember, before they colonized us, they colonized themselves. So I wouldn't even say that we were being raised up and they were like thought they could like be our parents. They were just like, oh, we're gonna commodify your land and your labor. And they did it through schools. And that's what boarding schools were. There you go. Like and subscribe.
We're right at the closing time. We had a question down here, and there's one more. We'll do those last two questions.
Real fast. First of all, thank you for sharing the Osage language with us. That was very new to me and remarkable to you. How, given that it's such an ancient language, how do you add new words?
It's really fun.
We just made all that up.
I had this loogie in my throat, and I was trying to...
Whatever moves me, I just say it. No, so there's fortunately, there was, I think it's the Bureau of Ethnology. There's always bureaus, right, of the American government. And so they did a lot of recordings. Again, going back to that vanishing Indian thing, they were like, oh, we need to like record all this stuff for posterity. So there was a lot of recording of the language. And there was still, even though there was the so-called boarding schools, which I call indoctrination mills, they were basically there were still speakers out there, still passing it down. And one thing with the Osage, there's a thing called the Gaia Language Conference, where the Osage, the Omaha, the Ponca, and the Kaw, all speakers in those different tribes get together because at one time that language was all the same language.
We all came from Cahokia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you know about Cahokia, that was like, So if you know about Cahokia, that's where a lot of the tribes out this way originated from, and that's where they kind of had this like main language, and eventually over time dialects change. But what they're doing is they're basically taking, okay, so maybe the Poncas know a word that the Osages don't know still, So they're basically just kind of piecing it all back together. So that's kind of to answer your question. So
Let me jump in. Okay, this is what's really fun. And in the year 2000, we have a 20,000, the Osage Nation, there's 20,000 members currently. In the year 2000, there was maybe 80 fluent speakers left. And the nation said, oh my goodness, we need to do something, because regardless of those recordings, we need to maintain and recreate the tradition. So they pumped money into a language program. Our dad was one of the first level 1 teachers. What they did was they created the first native speaker in, gosh, what was it like? It was like 2008 since 1920.
Yes.
A little baby
Yes.
got to grow up and speak our language. So the evolution of our language has not just been like, you know, the resilience through boarding schools and all of this thing, but then like that's part of what we represent. It's not about like how much blood can we possess and we must only marry our sisters. You know, like we, like a culture transcends and moves and evolves. And so what they did with our language program is they said, okay, cool, great, we've never had a written tradition before. We're gonna develop characters to correspond with the very specific sounds that we have. And then they created a written language for the first time. And we have the authority to do that. It doesn't matter if it wasn't a part of prehistory. It's a part of now, and it's part of what our future we get to dictate is gonna be. So our language, it's part and parcel, it's tied with the land. It's part and parcel of how we dictate our sovereignty. And that's why it's really important to know as many lanes and things out here are Osage, the words wajaje. Wajaje. That's just.
Lynn, the last question here.
Middle of the night, dragged by your heels, tied to a radiator.
There's before they passed the Indian Child Welfare Act back in the 70s, there was different people who were being interviewed, family, parents, and children people who were children during that time when they were taking kids to these so-called boarding schools. And there was a story where one woman thought her son had drowned in the river. For years, she didn't know where he was. And it turned out the missionaries took him to that school miles and miles away and just took him off the side of the road. And she had no idea that her son was alive, like just a few miles down the road. So I think that's kind of one of those stories where it's just like they were literally just like kidnapping a lot of these kids and shipping them in on trains and things like that. Haskell, where I go, where I work, used to be a so-called boarding school, where that language and culture was erased. Not entirely, because now it's a university and we get to teach about our own history and we get to talk about our own history and we can actually get reacquainted with our culture and things like that. So it's important to understand that. A lot of these things, at least from our point of view, we're still like reconnecting, we're still healing, we're still trying to garner that knowledge and to share it. And you know, hopefully doing things like this is making that awareness happen so that folks are aware that, you know, there are still things going on that we're still dealing with, you know. So anyways, thank you.
Great point. Jimmy, last semester, the students and I from Missouri Valley took a field trip to Haskell and got to go through the Cultural Heritage Center. And I do encourage any of you, when you're over on that side of the world and near Lawrence, to take a moment to go and visit that, because it tells the full story. And it's very insightful. Noel was a part of that group, so it's a wonderful museum. Do you have any final comments that you'd like to make?
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all very much for being here. We do look forward to hosting you in October for our next episode. And thank you to the J. Houston Tavern for opening for lunch. There's a prefix luncheon for those of you who would like to have some lunch. It's going to be tasty, I know. And the cast and the crew will be there, and we'll be happy to visit with you some more. Thank you again very much.